The Unexpected Inheritance, Chapter 1, The Summons. Evelyn Reed, a woman of 65 with silver threads woven through her once fiery auburn hair, lived a life of quiet contentment in a small, cozy bungalow in Santa Fe, New Mexico. 30 years had passed since her divorce from Arthur Sterling, a man who, in her memories, was less a person and more a fading photograph, a ghost from a past life. Their marriage had been brief, tumultuous, and ended acrimoniously, leaving Evelyn with little more than a bruised heart and a firm resolve to forge her own path, far from the shadows of his ambition. She had rebuilt her life brick by brick, finding joy in her art, vibrant desert landscapes, and the steady companionship of her beloved rescue dog, Daisy. One sun-drenched Tuesday morning, as she was sketching the Sangre de Cristo Mountains from her porch, the mail carrier delivered an envelope that stood out starkly against the usual bills and junk mail. It was thick, heavy, and bore the official seal of the Los Angeles Superior Court. Evelyn's heart gave a sudden, uncomfortable lurch. Lawsuits? A forgotten debt? Her life was simple, devoid of legal entanglements. Her hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as she tore open the seal. The letter inside, printed on stiff, formal paper, confirmed her unease. It was a summons, not for a lawsuit, but for a probate hearing. The name at the top of the document sent a wave of shock through her, making the desert air suddenly feel cold. In Re, estate of Arthur Wallace Sterling. Arthur, her ex-husband. He was dead. The news, delivered so casually by a legal document, hit her with an unexpected force. It had been 30 years. She hadn't thought about him in years, not truly. He was a chapter closed, a book put away. Yet a ghost of memory, sharp and sudden, pricked at her. Arthur, with his intense eyes, his restless energy, his boundless ambition that had ultimately consumed their marriage. The letter continued, each line deepening the surreal unreality of the moment. It stated in precise, legalistic language that she, Evelyn Marie Reed, was named as the sole beneficiary of Arthur Sterling's estate. Sole beneficiary, him, leaving her everything. It was beyond comprehension. The man who had, 3 decades ago, fought to keep every last penny, every piece of shared property, now, in death, had apparently left it all to her. Her mind reeled. Arthur Sterling, a man who had left their marriage with barely a backward glance, who had never reached out, never acknowledged her existence in the intervening years, had made her his sole heir. It defied logic. It defied their history. It felt like a cruel joke, a cosmic prank played by a universe with a twisted sense of humor. The letter specified a date and time for the probate hearing to be held in Los Angeles. She was instructed to bring identification and any documents pertaining to her previous marriage to Arthur Sterling. Evelyn stared at the letter, then out at the sun-drenched mountains, their ancient stillness a stark contrast to the turmoil erupting within her. Arthur had been a hugely successful, albeit cutthroat, businessman. She knew he had amassed a fortune. Rumored to be in the hundreds of millions, perhaps even billions, in real estate development, the thought of inheriting even a fraction of that was overwhelming, nauseating. It felt tainted. Her daughter, Sarah, who lived in Chicago, was her first call. Sarah, practical and grounded, listened in stunned silence. "Mom, this is unbelievable," Sarah finally said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and cautious excitement. "Are you sure it's real? Maybe it's some kind of scam?" "It has the court seal, Sarah," Evelyn replied, her voice still shaky. "And the lawyer's firm is one of the most prestigious in LA. This is real." "But why you, Mom?" Sarah pressed, voicing the question that hammered at Evelyn's own mind. "He remarried, didn't he? Had children? Why wouldn't it go to his family?" Evelyn knew Arthur had remarried, twice perhaps, though she hadn't followed his life closely. Children? She wasn't sure. The silence from his side of the world had been absolute. The idea of him leaving everything to her, a woman he had seemingly discarded, was an enigma wrapped in a paradox. The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls to legal aid lines, endless research into probate law, and a growing sense of surreal anxiety. She found a reputable probate attorney in Los Angeles, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Chen, who, after reviewing the documents, confirmed the extraordinary nature of the situation. "Ms. Reed, the will is clear. It was executed just 6 months ago, and it names you, and only you, as the sole heir. It's highly unusual, especially given the history, but legally sound." "But what about his other family, his wives, his children?" Evelyn asked, the question feeling both impertinent and desperately necessary. Miss Chen's voice was carefully neutral. "According to our records, Mr. Sterling was divorced from his subsequent wives, and he had no surviving direct descendants. His last wife predeceased him by a few years. He had no children of his own, adopted or biological, at the time of his death. You are, legally speaking, the only person named in his will." The confirmation sent a fresh wave of dizzying disbelief through Evelyn. No children, no other heirs. Arthur, the powerful, driven Arthur, had died alone, and had, inexplicably, left his vast empire to her, the woman he had divorced 3 decades prior. It felt less like an inheritance and more like a final, enigmatic message from a man she thought she had long since buried. A message she had no idea how to interpret. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that the probate hearing would only be the beginning of unraveling this baffling, profound mystery. Chapter 2: Echoes of a Fractured Past. The flight to Los Angeles felt like a journey into a different dimension. Evelyn clutched her worn leather handbag, inside which lay the brittle, yellowed copy of her divorce decree, the only official document linking her to Arthur Sterling. 30 years, a lifetime. Yet, the city's sprawling, sun-drenched landscape couldn't once a backdrop to their brief, intense marriage, now felt eerily familiar, a ghost from a past she had meticulously tried to erase. Her attorney, Ms. Chen, met her at the courthouse. Ms. Chen was brisk, efficient, and direct, a welcome contrast to the swirling chaos in Evelyn's mind. As they walked through the imposing marble halls, Evelyn felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. This wasn't just about money. It was about Arthur, his last act, a final, bewildering communication that demanded answers. The courtroom was surprisingly hushed. A small group gathered. There was a stern-looking judge, a court clerk, and then a handful of unfamiliar faces. A man in an expensive suit, who Ms. Chen identified as Arthur's longtime business partner, Mr. Hayes. 2 somber-looking women, whom Evelyn vaguely recognized as distant cousins of Arthur's, the only remaining blood relatives she knew of. Their expressions were a mixture of curiosity, thinly veiled resentment, and confusion. And then the will, a thick, daunting document. The reading of the will by Ms. Chen was a surreal experience. It was concise, legally precise, and utterly unequivocal. "I, Arthur Wallace Sterling, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my entire estate, real and personal, to my former wife, Evelyn Marie Reed. This is my true and final will and testament." No explanation, no flowery words, just that stark, baffling declaration. A ripple of murmurs went through the small courtroom. The cousins exchanged bewildered glances. Mr. Hayes looked grim, almost angry. The judge, an imposing woman with sharp eyes, maintained a poker face. "Does anyone present wish to contest this will?" the judge asked, her voice clear and authoritative. The older of Arthur's two cousins, a woman named Eleanor, spoke up, her voice tight with indignation. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. Arthur was married multiple times after Evelyn. He has distant family. He had business partners. Why would he leave everything to a woman he divorced 30 years ago? It makes no sense. He was not in his right mind." Miss Chen stepped forward. "Your Honor, the will was executed 6 months ago, witnessed by 2 independent parties and a reputable notary. A comprehensive medical assessment conducted prior to the will's signing confirmed Mr. Sterling's full mental competency. Furthermore, as per the will's specific instruction, the beneficiaries of his prior wills, including his last wife and any other named individuals, were explicitly disinherited in favor of Miss Reed." The judge nodded, her gaze sweeping over the silent room. "Unless there is clear, convincing evidence of undue influence or mental incapacitation at the time of execution, this court will uphold the testator's wishes." She paused, her eyes resting on Evelyn. "Miss Reed, the estate is substantial. Do you accept this inheritance?" Evelyn, her voice barely a whisper, felt the immense weight of the question. It wasn't just money. It was Arthur's final, inexplicable gesture. "Yes, Your Honor," she managed to say, her voice cracking slightly. "I accept." The hearing concluded, swift and decisive. Evelyn was now officially the sole heir to the vast Sterling empire. As she left the courtroom, the air outside felt different, heavier, charged with the incomprehensible reality of her new fortune. Mr. Hayes, Arthur's business partner, intercepted her outside. His face was a mask of thinly veiled anger and confusion. "Evelyn," he said, his voice clipped, "Arthur and I built that empire together. For him to leave it to you, it's a slap in the face. What did you do to him? What hold did you have?" "I haven't seen or spoken to Arthur Sterling in 30 years, Mr. Hayes," Evelyn replied, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm as bewildered as you are." His eyes narrowed, filled with suspicion. He walked away, muttering. Evelyn and Miss Chen went to the law firm. Miss Chen began to outline the enormity of the estate. Properties across the globe, diversified investments, art collections, luxury vehicles, private jets, billions. Evelyn felt a growing sense of detachment, as if she were hearing about someone else's life. This wasn't hers. It couldn't be. "Miss Reed, there's one more thing," Miss Chen said, her tone suddenly softening. "Mr. Sterling left a sealed envelope for you. He instructed it be given to you only after the will was officially probated. It was to be delivered by me, personally." Miss Chen handed her a thick, unaddressed envelope, sealed with red wax. Evelyn's name, Evelyn M. Reed, was written on it in Arthur's distinctive, elegant script. Her heart began to pound. This was it. The answer, the reason. The final message from the man who had ghosted her for decades, only to return with the most profound, bewildering gesture imaginable. Evelyn took the envelope, her fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. She felt a strange mix of fear and an almost desperate need for clarity. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about understanding, about finding closure to a story she thought had ended 30 years ago. As she tore the wax seal, she knew her life was about to unravel and be rewoven in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Chapter 3, The Unsent Letters. Evelyn's hands trembled as she broke the red wax seal on the thick envelope. The scent of aged paper, faintly reminiscent of Arthur's old study, filled her nostrils. Inside, neatly stacked, were not just one, but a series of letters, each dated, each addressed simply, "My dearest Evelyn," and below them, a single small tarnished silver locket. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Arthur, why now? Why this way? She picked up the first letter, dated 6 months prior, the same time the will was executed. His familiar, elegant script, a blend of precision and hidden passion, flowed across the page. My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and everything I have amassed, every single penny, every property, every piece of art, is now yours. I know this must come as an incomprehensible shock, perhaps even an insult. You may wonder if this is some final, cruel joke. It is not. It is the only way I could think of to make amends, to explain, to give you back what I took. Our marriage, Evelyn, was brief, tumultuous, and ended badly. I was a fool, an arrogant, driven, blind fool. I chased ambition, power, money, believing those things would fill the emptiness within me. They never did. They only made it worse. I lost you, Evelyn, me too, and in doing so, I lost the one true thing I ever had, the one true thing I ever wanted. For 30 years, I have lived with the crushing weight of that regret. I tried to forget you. I tried to replace you. I married others. I built empires. I pursued every fleeting pleasure. But no woman ever matched your spirit, your fierce integrity, your quiet strength. No accomplishment ever brought the peace that your presence once did. I write this from my deathbed, Evelyn, metaphorically speaking. I have been diagnosed with an aggressive, terminal illness. My time is short, and with the clarity that only facing one's mortality can bring, I see everything with devastating truth. I wasted my life chasing shadows, and I lost my light. This inheritance is not merely money. It is an apology, a confession, a desperate act of restitution. It is everything I have, offered to you, because you deserve it. You deserved so much more than I ever gave you. There is so much more to tell you, so much I need you to understand. Look for the other letters. They are scattered, like the fragments of my life. Each one reveals a piece of the truth, and the locket, it contains the most important key. Forgive me, if you ever can. Arthur. Evelyn finished the letter, tears blurring her vision. Not cruel, not a joke, an apology, a confession. His words, raw and agonizing, resonated with a pain that mirrored her own from decades ago. She felt a complex mix of emotions, a searing validation, a profound sorrow for his evident torment, and a bewildering confusion. He had lived with this regret for 30 years. The same 30 years she had spent carefully erasing him from her heart. She fumbled for the locket. It was heavy, cool against her palm. She opened it. Inside, instead of a picture, was a tiny, folded piece of paper, smaller than a postage stamp. She carefully unfolded it. On it, in Arthur's elegant script, were 2 words and a date. Lily, 1998. Lily, 1998. The name and date meant nothing to her. Yet Arthur had said the locket contained the most important key. Evelyn found the second letter tucked inside an old, leather-bound journal Miss Chen had also been instructed to give her. This journal, Arthur's personal diary, covered the period immediately following their divorce. The second letter was dated 5 years after their separation. My dearest Evelyn, it's 1998 now, 5 years since we parted. 5 years since I made the biggest mistake of my life. I hope you are well. I hope you have found peace, found happiness. I pray you found someone who truly sees you, truly values you, unlike the blind fool I was. I married again, Evelyn. Not for love, but for ambition, for a business alliance. It was a cold, empty union. It ended, as all things built on false pretenses do. And then I met her, Lily. She was a breath of fresh air, a burst of sunshine. So kind, so innocent, so different from the cynical world I had built around myself. Lily brought a spark back into my life that I thought was extinguished forever. We fell in love, Evelyn. A real, tender love. It was quiet, gentle, unlike the fiery passion we once shared. But it was profoundly real. She taught me about patience, about humility, about finding joy in simple things. Things I had dismissed in my relentless pursuit of wealth and power. She saw the broken man beneath the facade. And she loved him. We decided to have a child. A daughter. Our daughter, Lily always said, would heal all the wounds, would bring true light into our lives. We chose a name together, a name for a strong, kind, beautiful soul. We chose Evelyn, after you. Yes, Evelyn. We named our daughter after you, not because of a lingering romantic love for you. That had, I believed, faded into regret, but because Lily, in her wisdom, saw a strength and goodness in your character that she admired. She knew your story, your quiet resilience after our divorce. She believed that a child named Evelyn would embody those qualities. But it was not to be. Lily, she died in childbirth. And our daughter, our little Evelyn, she died with her, both gone in a single horrific moment. I lost them both, the love of my life and the child who would have been our salvation. That was 1998, Evelyn, the date in the locket. It was the year my world truly ended. It was the year I understood, with brutal clarity, what true loss was. And it was the year I truly understood what I had done to you, the pain I had inflicted. For the first time, I felt something akin to empathy, because my own pain was now so profound. Lily's death and the death of our daughter was my turning point. I fell into a deep, dark despair, but eventually, a purpose began to form. I would dedicate my remaining life to building something meaningful, something that could perhaps redeem me. And I would leave it all to you, the woman I had wronged, the woman whose name I had, ironically, chosen for the child I loved and lost. This was my penance, my legacy, my final act of love, however twisted and late. I'll tell you more in the next letter. Look for it in the old photo album, the one with the blue velvet cover, the one from our honeymoon. Arthur. Evelyn collapsed into a chair, the letters falling from her grasp. Lily, his wife, his child maimed after her. Both gone. It was a tragedy of such immense proportions that it overshadowed even her own pain. And in that moment, a profound shift occurred within her. Her anger, her bewilderment, began to transmute into a deep, aching empathy. Arthur, the powerful, cold, ambitious man, had been utterly broken by loss. And in that brokenness, he had found a perverse path to redemption. The inheritance was not a joke. It was a monument to his regret, his sorrow, and a twisted, desperate attempt to right a past wrong by empowering the woman he had abandoned. Evelyn, through his letters, was finally beginning to understand the ghost of Arthur Sterling. and the true, heartbreaking story of his life and hers. Chapter 4: The Path of Penance. The raw, agonizing revelations from Arthur's letters transformed Evelyn's understanding of her ex-husband. The arrogant, self-absorbed man she had divorced had been utterly shattered by the loss of Lily and their daughter. His colossal inheritance was not an act of whimsy, more a calculated manipulation, a desperate attempt at redemption from a man facing his own mortality. Evelyn found the blue velvet photo album, surprisingly, exactly where it had always been, on a dusty shelf in her own attic, alongside other mementos from her past life. She had never been able to bring herself to discard it, perhaps because it contained memories of a younger, more hopeful Evelyn. Inside, tucked between faded photographs of their honeymoon in Hawaii, was the next letter, dated several years after Lily's death. My dearest Evelyn, it's 2005 now. Years have passed since Lily and our daughter were taken from me. The grief, while it still aches, has become a dull roar rather than a deafening scream. In the silence that followed, I found a new purpose, a desperate need to atone. After Lily's death, I sold off most of my frivolous assets. The flashy cars, the ostentatious jewelry. They meant nothing, less than nothing. I focused solely on the business, not for personal gain, but with a singular driving intention: to build an empire vast enough, significant enough to leave to you. To create a legacy that could, in some small way, compensate for the profound injustice I had inflicted upon you. I worked relentlessly, fueled by a self-punishing drive, knowing that every dollar earned was a step towards balancing an unbearable moral debt. I saw your art, Evelyn, your desert landscapes. I subscribed to art journals under a false name, followed galleries in Santa Fe. Your work is beautiful, full of the peace and integrity I trampled on. It brought me a strange comfort, seeing that you had not only survived, but thrived, creating beauty where I had only sought profit. I considered reaching out to you many times, to apologize in person, to explain. But what could I say? How could I undo the hurt I caused? I was too ashamed, too afraid of your rejection. And I knew that to involve you in my life, a life now consumed by this singular, redemptive pursuit, would only taint the peace you had found. So I watched. From a distance, I hired discreet private investigators, not to spy, but to ensure you were well, safe, happy. I saw your daughter, Sarah, growing to a remarkable young woman. I saw your quiet life in Santa Fe, filled with art and dogs. It brought me a bittersweet satisfaction. You were exactly where you were meant to be. I was not. The properties I acquired, the businesses I built, they were chosen with your values in mind, Evelyn. Sustainable developments, properties with historical significance, investments in renewable energy. I knew you would appreciate that. I knew you would ensure they were managed ethically. I knew you would not squander it. You were always the only one I could truly trust, the only one whose moral compass pointed true north. I confess, there were moments of bitterness, moments when I questioned if this immense undertaking was truly for you or for my own twisted sense of self-flagellation. But the clarity of Lily's memory and the enduring ache of losing our daughter always brought me back to my purpose. It had to be for you, for the Evelyn I destroyed, for the Evelyn who rose from the ashes stronger and purer than I could ever hope to be. There's one last piece I need to share. It explains the profound depth of my initial error, the true reason for our undoing. It's in the old strong box, the one I kept hidden in my office. Behind the false panel in the bookshelf, the key is in the bottom of the locket I sent you. You'll need to press firmly on the velvet lining. May you find understanding and perhaps a small measure of peace. Arthur. Evelyn's hands shook as she reread the letter. He had watched her, followed her life, not out of malice, but out of a tortured desire for atonement. He had built his vast fortune, not for himself, but for her, a monument of regret, and the strongbox. The ultimate confession. She examined the locket, the tiny velvet lining at the bottom. She pressed firmly, as instructed. With a faint click, a false bottom popped open, revealing a miniature, almost microscopic key, no bigger than her thumbnail. It was a full week before Evelyn, guided by Miss Chen and a court order, gained access to Arthur's sprawling Los Angeles mansion, a testament to his wealth and now his hidden torment. It was a cold, imposing house, filled with priceless art and antique furniture. Yet it felt utterly empty, devoid of warmth or life. She found the office, just as Arthur had described, the bookshelf filled with heavy, leather-bound tomes. Behind a specific volume, a false panel. And behind it, a strong steel strongbox, heavy and unyielding. The tiny key from the locket fit perfectly. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was not another letter, but a single, yellowed photograph. It was a picture of a woman, a beautiful woman with dark, intense eyes and a proud, almost defiant tilt to her head. And in her arms, a swaddled infant. The infant had a clear, unmistakable butterfly-shaped birthmark on its temple. Evelyn gasped. It was the same photograph from the locket her mother had given her, the one that had started her own journey of discovery as Eleanor May Thorne. But this photograph was different. On the back, in faint, elegant script, was a name and a date. Clara Reed, 1953. Clara Reed, Evelyn's mother. And next to it, tucked into a slim pocket within the strongbox, was a single, typed, official-looking document. It was an adoption certificate, dated 1954, listing Arthur Wallace Sterling and Clara Marie Reed as the adoptive parents of a child named Evelyn Marie Sterling. Evelyn stared, her mind reeling. Her own birth certificate, the one she had for 72 years, listed her as Martha Eleanor Davis, daughter of Elizabeth and Frank Davis. But this document stated she was Evelyn Marie Sterling, adopted daughter of Arthur Sterling and Clara Reed. Her mother, Clara, had never mentioned an adoption. Her father, John Reed, had never mentioned it. And Arthur Sterling, her ex-husband, had been her adoptive father. This wasn't just about an inheritance. This wasn't just about Arthur's regret. This was about her own life, her true origins, a profound layer of deception, even deeper than the secret of Eleanor May Thorne. She had lived under a forged identity as Martha Eleanor Davis, and now she was faced with the impossible truth that her adoptive parents were not John and Clara Reed, but Arthur Sterling and Clara Reed. The man she divorced had been her father all along. Her world, once again, shattered into a million pieces. Chapter 5. The Web of Secrets. The revelation of the adoption certificate hit Evelyn with a force far greater than any financial inheritance. Evelyn Marie Sterling, adopted daughter of Arthur Wallace Sterling and Clara Marie Reed. Clara Reed, her mother. The name was right. But Arthur Sterling, her ex-husband Arthur, was her adoptive father. The man she had spent decades trying to forget was in fact integral to her very existence, a thread woven deeply into the fabric of her earliest, most foundational memories. She stared at the photograph again, the young woman holding the infant with the butterfly birthmark. Clara Reed, 1953. Her mother. But her mother, Clara, had had another child, a daughter, before Evelyn was born, a child who had died in infancy. That was the family story. A quiet tragedy. Evelyn sank onto a plush armchair in Arthur's opulent, silent office, the documents scattered around her like fragments of a shattered mirror. Her mind raced, piecing together the impossible puzzle. The Social Security revelation about Eleanor May Thorne, the locket from her mother with the same baby and birthmark, the story of Clara and Charles Thorne, and now this, an adoption certificate naming her and Arthur as adoptive parents. The timelines felt utterly tangled, contradictory. She called Miss Chen, her voice barely a whisper, relaying the new, staggering discovery. Miss Chen, usually unshakable, was momentarily speechless. Miss Reed, this changes everything. We need to investigate this immediately. Adoption records from that era are often sealed, but with a will of this magnitude, and given the direct connection to Mr. Sterling, we may be able to petition the court for unsealing. The next few weeks were a blur of legal motions, genealogical research, and painful introspection. Miss Chen, through a rarely used court order, managed to gain access to the sealed adoption records. What they revealed was a story of desperate measures, entangled loves, and a web of secrets far more intricate than Evelyn could have imagined. The original adoption certificate was indeed for Evelyn Marie Sterling, adopted by Arthur Wallace Sterling and Clara Marie Reed. But the dates were crucial. The adoption took place in late 1954, when Evelyn would have been almost a year old. The records also showed that prior to this adoption, Clara Reed had formally adopted a baby, a female infant, in early 1954, following a period of illness and recovery in North Carolina. This infant's original birth certificate was indeed Eleanor May Thorne, born in 1953 in a remote county in North Carolina, listed to parents Charles Thorne and Elizabeth May Thorne, her birth mother, the same Elizabeth her Aunt Beatrice had spoken of. The pieces, though painful, began to align with a horrifying clarity. Clara Reed, Evelyn's mother, was actually Elizabeth May Thorne, the young woman who had fallen in love with Charles Thorne and given birth to Eleanor May Thorne, Evelyn's true birth name, in 1953. To escape the scandal of an unwed birth, Elizabeth, with her parents' complicity, had faked a stillbirth for Eleanor May Thorne. She then went to Savannah, Georgia, and assumed the new identity of Clara Marie Reed. And she took her infant daughter, Eleanor May Thorne, with her, presenting her as her adopted child, Martha Eleanor Davis, to the grieving Davises. So the Martha Eleanor Davis identity was correct. She was adopted by the Davises. But then, Arthur Sterling. The adoption certificate found in Arthur's strongbox revealed that Arthur Sterling had married Clara Reed, formerly Elizabeth May Thorne, in 1954, shortly after she arrived in Savannah. Arthur, then a young, ambitious lawyer on the rise, had fallen deeply in love with the quiet, enigmatic Clara. He knew her secret, that Martha Eleanor Davis was not truly an adopted child, but Clara's biological daughter. Eleanor May Thorne, born out of wedlock. Arthur, in an act of profound love and protection for Clara, and perhaps driven by his own desire for a family and a fresh start, had legally adopted Martha Eleanor Davis as his own daughter, giving her the name Evelyn Marie Sterling. This was done to solidify Clara's new identity as Clara Reed and to give the child, Evelyn, a respectable name and a legitimate father in their new, carefully constructed life. The adoption was private, sealed, and meticulously hidden from public view. So Evelyn had not one, but two layers of hidden identity. Her birth name was Eleanor May Thorne, born to Charles Thorne and Elizabeth May Thorne. She was then adopted by the Davises and raised as Martha Eleanor Davis. And simultaneously, or shortly thereafter, she was also adopted by Arthur Sterling and Clara Reed, Elizabeth May Thorne, and legally named Evelyn Marie Sterling. The first divorce, the one Evelyn remembered so bitterly, was the divorce between Arthur Sterling and Clara Reed, Elizabeth May Thorne. Clara had found Arthur's growing ambition and ruthless business practices unbearable. She craved a quieter, simpler life. A life away from the constant pressure of secrets and the relentless pursuit of wealth. She had left Arthur, taking Evelyn, then Martha Eleanor Davis, with her, and moved to Santa Fe, reaffirming her original forged identity as Clara Marie Reed and reaffirming Evelyn's identity as Martha Eleanor Davis. The second set of records had simply gone dormant, and Arthur, he had lived for decades, carrying the secret that his ex-wife was in fact his daughter through adoption. He had loved Clara, loved Evelyn. The loss of Lily and their biological daughter, also named Evelyn, had brought him full circle, back to the first Evelyn, the one he had legally adopted, the one he had loved as a father figure, the one he had lost when Clara left him. His overwhelming grief had brought him clarity. He recognized his past mistakes, his relentless ambition, his neglect of the relationships that truly mattered. His final act was to rectify this, to acknowledge the daughter he had once claimed, and to ensure she received everything he had built. The full truth was a dizzying tapestry of love, loss, secrecy, and profound choices made under immense pressure. Evelyn Marie Reed, the artist in Santa Fe, was a culmination of layers of hidden identities, a testament to the desperate, loving acts of multiple individuals. She was Eleanor May Thorne by birth, Martha Eleanor Davis by adoption and upbringing, and Evelyn Marie Sterling by a secret adoption by her first husband, who was also her first mother's second husband, and, in a profound twist, her adoptive father. The magnitude of this revelation was almost unbearable. Evelyn felt a deep, aching sorrow for her mother, Clara Elizabeth, who had lived her entire life entangled in this web of deception, carrying such immense burdens and making such painful choices to protect her child. And for Arthur, the man she had loathed for so long, who had carried his own equally heavy secret, his own profound grief and guilt, for 3 decades, culminating in this final, dramatic act of restitution. Evelyn now understood everything. The duplicate payments from Social Security, one to Martha Eleanor Davis, one to Eleanor May Thorne, were not a glitch, but the ghost of her original, true birth record, finally surfacing from decades of dormancy, triggered by the sophisticated new biometric systems. The inheritance was not a cruel joke, but the final, profound apology and legacy from a man who, in his dying days, had sought to make amends for a lifetime of mistakes by empowering the woman who was both his ex-wife and his adoptive daughter. Evelyn sat amidst the silent opulence of Arthur's office, the weight of her inheritance now secondary to the overwhelming weight of her true history. She was no longer just Evelyn Reed, the artist. She was Eleanor May Thorne, Martha Eleanor Davis, and Evelyn Marie Sterling. She was a woman born of love and tragedy, raised in layers of secrecy, and finally, truly, fully revealed. Her life, once defined by a simple divorce, was now a monumental epic of hidden identities, lost loves, and the ultimate, surprising power of forgiveness, both given and received. Chapter 6: A Legacy of Truth and Reconciliation. The revelation of her multifaceted identity, Eleanor May Thorne by birth, Martha Eleanor Davis by upbringing, and Evelyn Marie Sterling through a secret, profound adoption by Arthur, left Evelyn in a state of quiet, profound shock. The initial disorienting jumble of names and timelines began to settle, forming a coherent, albeit heartbreaking, narrative. She was a woman woven from layers of love, loss, sacrifice, and desperate measures. The weight of Arthur's will, the vast inheritance, now felt not like a burden, but a tool for honoring the incredible, complex lives that had converged to create her own. Evelyn spent weeks immersed in the newly unsealed adoption records, cross-referencing them with the information from Aunt Beatrice, delving into the specific historical context of the 1930s and 1950s. She traced the painstaking steps her birth mother, Elizabeth May Thorne, who became Clara Marie Reed, had taken. The daring escape from scandal, the forging of new identities, the quiet life built on a foundation of secrecy. She found old land deeds and marriage certificates that confirmed Elizabeth's desperate marriage to Arthur Sterling, a calculated move to legitimize her child, Evelyn Eleanor May Thorne, and to secure a future in a world that offered few options for single mothers. Arthur, for his part, had been smitten by Clara's quiet strength and enigmatic charm, and his decision to adopt Evelyn was an act of profound love and protection, a testament to his character before ambition consumed him. The details were agonizing. The sacrifices Elizabeth made, living in constant fear of exposure. Arthur's early, genuine love that later curdled into a ruthless pursuit of power. The subsequent divorce between Clara, Elizabeth, and Arthur, which Evelyn remembered as the defining rupture of her childhood, now understood as Clara's desperate attempt to escape Arthur's darkening ambition and provide a more stable, less complicated life for her daughter, Martha Evelyn. Clara had taken her daughter and simply reverted to the Martha Eleanor Davis narrative, letting the Evelyn Marie Sterling identity fade into dormant legal records. Evelyn also sought out the distant Thorne relatives in North Carolina, the family of her biological father, Charles Thorne. Armed with the unsealed adoption records and her compelling story, she was cautiously but warmly received. They were stunned by the revelation of Charles's daughter, a living legacy he never knew. They shared faded photographs of a young, vibrant Charles, detailing his dreams and his passion for the mountains. Evelyn saw a part of herself in his eyes, a shared spirit that transcended 70 years of silence. This connection was a profound healing, finally allowing her to acknowledge the true biological father whose tragic death had set her life's complex journey in motion. With the emotional weight of her past beginning to lift, Evelyn turned her attention to Arthur's vast estate. Miss Chen, her attorney, guided her through the labyrinthine details of Sterling Enterprises. Arthur had indeed built an empire, but as he stated in his letters, many of his later ventures were aligned with values Evelyn championed: sustainable land development, investments in clean energy technology, and preservation projects. It was as if, in his dying years, he had tried to build a legacy she could accept, a monument to the integrity he once knew and lost. Evelyn decided to honor Arthur's final, unspoken plea for redemption. She established the Sterling Thorne Foundation, named for Arthur, her adoptive father, and Charles Thorne, her biological father. Its mission would be twofold: to provide scholarships for young women from disadvantaged backgrounds to pursue higher education, particularly in STEM fields, in honor of the intelligent, resilient women who had shaped her life. Elizabeth, Clara, Lily, and herself, to fund legal aid and advocacy for individuals whose identities had been compromised or obscured by historical injustices, poverty, or social stigma, ensuring that no one else would suffer the disorienting loss of self that she had experienced. She also decided to use a significant portion of the inheritance to purchase and preserve a vast tract of untouched desert land in New Mexico, ensuring its beauty remained untainted by development. Here, she planned to establish an artist's retreat, a place for quiet contemplation and creative expression, far from the madding crowds, a true sanctuary dedicated to the beauty and solitude that had defined her own path to healing. Evelyn's daughter, Sarah, initially overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the inheritance, came to understand the profound emotional significance of her mother's journey. Sarah became deeply involved with the foundation, helping Evelyn navigate the complexities of philanthropy, proud of her mother's strength and compassion. The old Victorian home in Savannah, where Martha Davis had received that fateful letter, now held a different kind of history for Evelyn. She kept the locket, the letters, and the old adoption certificate in a place of honor, no longer hidden, but cherished as symbols of her extraordinary past. She was no longer just Evelyn Reed, the artist in Santa Fe. She was Eleanor May Thorne, the child of forbidden love; Martha Eleanor Davis, the daughter of a desperate, loving deception; and Evelyn Marie Sterling, the child adopted by a man whose final act was one of profound, agonizing redemption. Her life, once defined by a simple divorce, was now a monumental epic of hidden identities, lost loves, profound sorrow, and the ultimate surprising power of forgiveness, both given and received. The silent judge of the probate court, the official paperwork, the vast wealth, all had simply been the instruments that finally allowed the full, complicated, and utterly human story of Evelyn Reed to be told. She had not only inherited a fortune, she had inherited her true self, a legacy of truth and reconciliation that spanned decades and generations. Her quiet retirement had transformed into a vibrant, purposeful new chapter, dedicated to shedding light on the shadows of the past and building a future rooted in authenticity and compassion.